Hello everyone, thank you ever so much for joining and welcome to our latest digital event. My name's Oliver, I'm a Principal and Head of Onsite Partnerships here at Burn Sheehan. I am really excited to be joined by 4 experts in the D&I space who will be sharing their experience on attracting a diverse workforce. We came about planning this session as we realised that there are so many companies thinking harder and smarter about their diversity roadmap, and like us, still remain a little uneasy about how to approach particular topics or questions that could be considered quite delicate. So this panel discussion really is a safe learning environment for everyone to reflect and ask questions, share points to consider when building sustainable D&I initiatives. The goal here is to better understand how we can improve opportunities and create greater pathways for diverse communities and give guidance on ways of working to help build out a more diverse workforce. Now, this is obviously something that's part of every hiring manager's, every talent and people team's agendas. So I really do hope that this proves beneficial to those on the call. Throughout, please do feel free to ask questions. We will try our best to answer these in real time. If not, we have got some time allocated at the end to answer those questions. Now, I'm really proud and very fortunate to have such a great panel, which I will now introduce. So we've got Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Jackie is the founder of Kinsey People Solutions. They provide strategic people consultancy and executive leadership coaching. And Jackie's been successful in doing so across multiple industries, particularly IT, for the last 20 years. She's also a non-exec director of Power. Power's vision is to empower all people to have a voice, make a real difference in their lives. And they provide information, advice, support, and advocacy to people who experience disability, vulnerability, distress, and social exclusion. Chloe, hi Chloe. Chloe is the head of PR and partnerships for MyGWork, LGBT and professionals and allies. MyGWork are an award-winning company who are listed top 5 startup with pride by Geek Times. MyGWork provide a safe space for LGBT students, graduates, and business professionals to connect with inclusive employers, roles, and professional events. Chloe also volunteers for UK Black Pride, London Queer Fashion Show, and is an ambassador for LGBTQ women. Sean is the talent acquisition manager and squad lead and D&I champion for BJSS, who are an award-winning IT consultancy. Sean's been responsible for building out great teams across Leeds and Sheffield, and all the while ensuring that D&I is at the forefront when doing so. Finally, Kate. Kate is the founder and CEO of FairHQ. FairHQ are the first technology product to help companies audit and benchmark their diversity and inclusion, and they create effective and evidence-based strategy. Kate is also the co-founder of She Wins. She Wins is an organisation which empowers women to negotiate for their value to help to reduce the gender pay gap. So that's the introductions and enough from me. I'm really excited to get going. We've got 4 key topics to cover, and we'll aim to spend about 10 minutes on each before going to the questions that we can't answer during. So first things first, what's the first step that we can make and where do we start? So, Kate, everyone is striving for a diverse workforce. What are the first steps that a business can take and where should they start?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ollie, for a great introduction, and welcome everyone to this wonderful panel. I'm very glad to be here. So one of the first steps I would always recommend is to understand where the company actually is right now. So try to audit where they are standing in diversity and inclusion, and it can be like from the perspective of their policies, processes, different behaviors in the organization, the level of diversity in comparison to their location and industry, as well as to measure inclusion and also compare it for people that might be coming from minority backgrounds rather than from the others, and that will help them understand, like, okay, so this is where the key points are, where we stand with the diversity and inclusion. What are the things that we might be doing and what might be lacking, and what are the steps that will be part of our first strategy. And it's a complex and big thing to do, but that if that was the first step, I would definitely recommend that. And I'm happy to give opportunity to other panelists to add their first steps that they would take.
Talked about this team. We had a code. Good morning, everyone. Or say good afternoon. It's really great to be here. I think it's also about thinking about when we're creating inclusive environments, who's not necessarily there or what point of difference isn't in your business. So when thinking about how you want to build and grow an inclusive culture, where are you posting your roles, and diversify where you're posting your roles. Really think about, you know, if you want to engage with more marginalized backgrounds, then you're going to have to go and advertise your roles in those areas with certain demographics of people to try and bring in a more diverse workforce. So expand where you look, and actually sometimes think about, instead of you know, trying to build inclusive cultures to have more point of difference and diversity in your business, that sometimes you might actually have to go and seek those candidates yourself and go and look in spaces that you might not traditionally have looked before.
Right. So are you able to kind of share any examples of some small changes that you've made earlier on in the process that companies can implement to their existing processes and make themselves accountable for?
I think it starts with your intent. And, you know, it's like Kate said, when you're thinking about what's your practice, what's your policy towards diversity and inclusion, it's making sure that actually that's embedded in everywhere in your business, that you have a very clear diversity and inclusion statement or policy. This is how, as a business, we are going to look to attract not only and celebrate difference, but actually garner and success, and make sure that we're taking care of difference within our business. So that starts and stops with your diversity and inclusion statement and the policy that you have throughout your business. And then you can adapt and work on that based on the different parts of your business where you might be missing, where you don't have, where you can bring in conversations and training. But if you don't know what that is, that's the first thing that you need to work on, and at least have those consultations within your business. Maybe it's within your management teams, maybe it's an AGM with your staff to say, look, you know, we want to be productive, we want to be reflective of modern day society. Can you also help us think about how we work on that? How do we do that collectively together? Get your employees on board with actually driving real change within your business. So yeah, that I think will probably be my first step, and then everybody else, because I'm a gabber, so stop me talking.
I'm jumping in now. I'm going to jump in now. It's really interesting what you just said there, and connecting up what you've said and also what Kate said. It's the why are we doing this, I think, is really important. And I really loved how you articulated, let's get everybody involved in the organisation today. And I think one of the best ways to increase that diversity and inclusivity is get people to refer people. And it comes back to what Chloe was saying. If you don't have that current demographic in your organisation, then connect up to communities and groups and ask for their help and their referrals. But if you do have that community already and it's in the minority, then I would definitely look at saying, can you refer some people, your friends, because it is then going to build that culture inside the organisation.
Totally, and Chloe and as well as Jackie, I would add on the top of that as well, what might be a really practical way is you can make things much more measurable. So you can treat it as your other business strategies that you have. So if you want to increase the level of diversity representation in your hiring funnel, you might need to measure what the diversity representation actually is currently at every stage of that funnel. And that will give you transparency and might help you identify different gaps for different roles. And that can be a great way to then position that as like, okay, this is no one's fault, but we can see that, for example, we're able to attract good talent that are from different diverse backgrounds, but they never get through the interview stage, what are we going to do to make that particular stage a bit more inclusive? What are the things we might be able to, how do we reduce bias in that particular interview stage? Or maybe we never attract the right talent, that we're going to look for the talent from, we're going to try to post our jobs, different places, as Jackie said, like try to reach out to the communities, try to get referrals from those. And that can be one of the solutions. So it's, if we measure things, and as people say, like what gets measured gets done, right? And that's the same thing, and we can treat the diversity and inclusion as other strategies that we develop internally.
So it's a lot about the kind of investigating your own company and looking at yourselves internally. So when companies are putting these things in place, how can they effectively monitor the initial changes? Is there a quota that should be something that should be set out at the beginning?
Yes, it's
Okay.
Sean, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think it comes back to what Jackie, Chloe and Kate just discussed around, there's a measurement of where we are now and where do we want to be. And I think you can almost look at, if you're in a company that has multiple locations, you probably don't want to just do an overall, right, we've got 2,000 people across the business and take that data. You want to then break that down by location as well, because you're going to face different challenges around that. So actually, where if I'm hiring in Leeds and Sheffield, I may have different problems to attract people from different diverse backgrounds to, say, London or New York. So it's actually then trying to break it down on an individual basis and look at ways that we can try to increase that attraction level to that broader demographic in those locations. So it's not always taking a one-size-fits-all approach either. If you are across several locations, try and work out what your problems are specifically there. Look at your corporate social responsibility. Is it that there's different groups and networks you can get involved with in different locations as well, rather than, again, a blanket UK-wide one, for example. Look at all the different meetup groups you've got there as well. And the referrals thing is really interesting, because if in Leeds I'm looking at referrals, there's a good chance that if it's going to be representative of how we may look, I'm just going to get a lot of the same type of person coming through. So again, it touched on what was discussed earlier. How do you drive that within specific groups as well?
And Sean, that brings me on, because I'd noticed something on BGSS, I think it was only this morning actually, about how a new initiative that you're running across Leeds and Sheffield for the retraining and returning to work.
Yeah, it's good timing by Stuart, that, wasn't it? He mentioned it in Women in Leeds Digital this morning as part of Leeds Digital Festival. So yeah, we're looking to sort of increase and attract people from different avenues. So I guess one of the challenges, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Ollie, as a recruiter, is everybody's fishing from the same pond. You're looking for those same experienced people that tick as many of the boxes as possible, but we're dealing with an industry there that's not reflective of society as it is today. So what we're trying to do is increase to 80 new roles fill 80 new roles by 2021, looking at more school leavers, more apprentices, still continuing with our university graduates, and also people sort of retraining or returning to work as well. So we're trying to get loads of different experience levels, different backgrounds from people, and therefore diversity of thought, which creates a better environment, better solutions for our clients as a consultancy. So it's a win-win. But if none of us are investing in that future talent, as much as I love this panel, this is great, I'm going to learn loads today, I don't want to be sat here in 10 years having the same conversation. I really want to be in a different point at that place. But otherwise, I feel that I'm very much part of the problem there, and I want to do is whatever change I can, even if it's a small amount, to make it more inclusive for future generations.
That's it. So we'll move on to the attracting a diverse pool of candidates. Now, Kate, I know this is something that you've done really effectively recently around kind of writing and including information in a job ad to ensure that it's not just attracting the same profile of person again and again. Could you tell us a bit about that job spec and the job ad that you put together, then how it was effective? Because I understand there was a bit of a success story off the back of it.
Absolutely. So, my background is also in HR, so I was HR for 4.5 years, and I can tell you that I did what Sean was talking about. I was asking for referrals, and I was so good at getting referrals that I had 95% of the team that was, you know, about 30 to 35-year-olds with 2 kids, guys, white, same, right? So I've been through making those mistakes myself. So building my other companies later on, I was like, okay, maybe there's a way to do it a bit differently. And we've done a ton of research internally in Fair HQ, how we can, you know, how we can ensure that we teach the right practices to other companies when they're actually posting the job ads. And there's so much research around that. But what we did very recently when we were hiring our behavioral scientist is that we really wanted to make sure that we apply everything that we learned and everything that we teach in those job descriptions. And so one of the really important things is to make sure that you really know what that person will be doing in the short term, medium term, and long term. And we actually broke it down into those areas of the things that that person will need to accomplish in those particular attempts. And in short term was like 3 months, and midterm was like 6 to 12 months, and then like later on was like 12 months after that. And we were looking into making sure that the people that are applying also understand what are these particular things that will need to happen in that role. So they will be like, okay, this is what I can do, or maybe this is what I will need to learn for me to be able to achieve that in 12 months from that. So that was one of the things. And then we wrote down based on that also the key requirements, and we separate into essential ones are the most important ones for people to have. One of them, as an example, for example, was that we need someone that has done survey construction. So they've done like constructed scales before, because that was one of the things we needed to do. And that was a really important requirement. And it's also a really important requirement to have like person that have applied behavioral science in a practice before. And that was like 2 things that I was like, these are the key things that I'm looking for. I don't really care if they had like 10 years of experience, 2-3 years of experience, but they really needed to show and demonstrate the application in the real life and show like they constructed the scales. Then another thing we did, we included salary bands. We really wanted to make sure that it's inclusive for everyone and everybody knows. We did our research. I spent about 2-3 days actually doing that. We also made sure that people understood that all these requirements that we have there are things that they don't need to have all of them to be able to apply for the role. So we made it very explicit as well. Then we didn't have any photos, so we excluded all of those because it was just me at that time. So I was like, ooh. And then we also made sure that we list the benefits and flexibility to ensure that like people with different requirements and, you know, time requirements, or those required for caring for the children, or, you know, if they have specific requirements, how they work. We made sure we checked for biased language. So we did the gender check. We also did start posting it on accessible platforms. So I was actually checking it for accessibility to ensure that people that might have a visual impairment or any other impairments, or they might just find it harder to read the normal text. And then we were also very mindful where we post the stuff and who was actually distributing those. So I was asking very specific people. I was looking in LinkedIn, actually selecting the right people that I thought it might be either helpful to give us advice or to find the diverse candidates for that particular role, and etc. So that was absolutely important. And then the second stage after that selection, that's another story. But that was what helped us. And we were able to attract about 50-50 women and men. We had people from different ethnic minorities as well, and we selected the candidate based on, work samples and things that are part for the interview process. Also get advice from other people what we should be asking for. But that was kind of the whole process. So for a bit lengthy explanation, but I thought to go a bit more in detail.
I think that's really great examples from both Sean and you, Kate, around in order to take the first step is to really challenge what you've already got in place and to have a look at, I think, Sean, you said if we keep doing what we've always done, we've got the same pool, we're going to get the same results. So it is about, I think the onus is on us as organisations to look at different alternative ways to attract and fill the gap. Because there's definitely a gap in terms of opportunity, privilege, access to education. So what are the training programs that we can do? But also then be really rigorous in our internal reflection around what do we actually need from people? Never mind that we want a master's in computer science. And actually some of the best developers that I found in my previous company didn't actually have a computer science education. It was more from a philosophical problem solving, understanding, and a passion for technology. And when you add those two together, then you don't need to sort of fish in the same pool. So I think it's great examples from both of you.
just on that, with the degree side of things, it's something that a lot of places always put a lot of relevance on. So yeah, a first or a 2-1 in a computer science degree, is it from a red brick or not? And we sort of slowly, year on year, sort of been changing the sort of criteria, because like you say, nothing will change and be perfect overnight, but we need to challenge, do a small step, see how that works. Does it work? Doesn't it? Challenge it again and take that next step. So now I think we looked at our graduate intake that started this month, and there's people with all sorts of degree backgrounds and not computer science, but they're all coming in for engineering roles. So, like you say, Jackie, they're just passionate about software development. We've done a lot in, done bits in their own time to get a base understanding, and they've flown through our process. And, it's nice to be able to watch everybody now. I look at that intake to previous years, and it's a really diverse mix of where people have come from, which is sort of really nice for that. And then if you add on your apprentices, school leavers, cross trainers, all that sort of side of things as well, you're getting this great pool of people that just be awesome when you watch them grow over sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? But yeah, we have to challenge it, and I'm the first to admit nothing's ever perfect, but just keep challenging it. And I'm probably going to take a lot away from today and look at what I can change after this call as well, to be fair.
It's interesting, Sean, because there's a question that's coming actually about apprenticeships and going to schools and colleges to advocate an apprenticeship. So you have a diverse pool of people who aren't necessarily sure what they want to do next.
Yeah, I think we've gone into schools, and I've done it in previous roles as well, and just sort of talk about different careers you can have. I think when I was leaving school and dropping out of college in my first year, you didn't have these opportunities, right? And I'm not a very hands-on person. I can barely paint a wall within a line, to be honest. So the apprenticeships you had when I was leaving school was all around sort of plumbing and electrician. I'm just not very good at that stuff at all. But now there's so many, such a variety of apprenticeships that you can go to, and with the encouragement to leverage the apprenticeship levy as well, it's just lost money if you're not taking advantage of it. You even see some of the really big organisations. I met with a chap last year, and I won't name who, but they just can't use all of their levy money because it's so much. So they were reaching out to smaller local businesses to try and actually sponsor apprenticeships for them, because they didn't want to see that money go to waste, right? So that's how far a lot of companies are going to leverage that. And I think, it's not only just for the apprenticeships, but learning you can use, for your current staff as well. So it's silly not to explore that and reach out to people that have sort of had success with it and learn from it. That's what I would advise. Speak to your network, speak to your community, because there's always someone who's ahead of you in that stage, and you can get a lot of learnings from them as well.
Right. And whilst we're on the topics of the job spec side of things, Kate, when you mentioned about posting the job specs and the ads, there's a question that's saying, is there any platforms in which that you used that were effective for you to attract different communities? As a lot of the places that have been found cater specifically to diverse candidates have quite a hefty fee. Is there any that you'd used, or any that anyone can recommend, which are free platforms for people to?
So I have a very different approach about posting. So I'm basically like, one of the things that you can post, people measure their success by amount of the candidates, sometimes how much they get them, but actually I never measure my success with that. So what I do, I tend to actually reach out to very specific communities or people that might be very similar to the people that I would like to attract, and ask them for advice. How would they actually go about getting that candidate? I know it's much more work, and really big companies, maybe you don't have time to do that, but that's my approach, and it really works. So our CTO, she is French. She's Black. She's coming from a very interesting community. She is, a full stack developer. She's absolutely kick-ass. And the way how I got her on board is that I reached out to her on LinkedIn, and I was like, hey, this is my job spec. I'm thinking like, what are the things that we can improve about it to make sure it's very inclusive and can attract incredible people like you are. Would you mind recommending me places where you would look for things like that or something? And she was like, actually, this is really interesting. This is a really interesting job. I'm actually very interested in what you're doing. I have lots of experience. Can we talk about it? I'm happy to have a chat. And that's how I ended up actually doing that. So I'm sure that Sean, Chloe, and Jackie might have more experience with other platforms. I tend to be like much more like hands-on at the beginning, but when you scale the team, of course, you need to find those, and there are a lot of them popping up. And I'm definitely be happy to create a list of those and share in the future, but I'm here to learn from the other panelists as well, so I'll give them space.
I guess as a platform, so we are entirely free for anyone to navigate through. You actually can come and look for a job and a role, but I think maybe I should explain a bit of our history. So my GWork has been around for 5 years. We started as a job board, but we started as a job board from a place of oppression. So I work for 2 identical twins, Pierre and Adrienne, and basically they were told that as gay men, they would never amount to anything. They would never get a good job because they were gay. So that's why our business was created, for a place for LGBT people to find work where they weren't to have the fear of being discriminated in the workplace. And so we make sure that anyone who is from a more diverse background, who wants to work for an inclusive employer where they won't have that fear of being discriminated against, still can access many different roles. Our job is to actually, every single employer on our platform, and we have about 220 now around the globe, they are all inclusive employers. So we are a membership base. The organization will pay to be part of our community, but an individual, it's absolutely no charge, because we think it's important to be able to find yourself, navigate, be able to bring your full self, your full skill set, and not be afraid of, like in my instance, I'm Black, I'm bisexual, I'm a working parent, I'm a mental health survivor. I want to bring all of those identities when I come to work. I don't want to have to worry about, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to clock off to do the school run, and so flexible working. And so I know that if I'm going to go, not that I'm going to look for another role, but if I'm going to go and look for another role, that those all identities are all catered for. And I think from that point, whilst we've become this amazing community, at the heart of who we are is still a safe space for more marginalized people to be able to go and find work. I think it's really important, when we're asking about where do we find more diverse, people, sometimes you have to go to where we are, but it comes from a place of safety, because of its understanding the different barriers that stop people from showing up in the workplace. So it's, when you're saying, well, I'm doing referrals and we're getting the same kinds of people, that's because actually we're not actually understanding what are the points of difference that stop more diverse candidates from being able to apply. I love what you said, Kate, about actually having the engagement with someone that you found on LinkedIn and you went and had that one-on-one rapport. But for a lot of LGBT people navigating through LinkedIn looking for a role, they're actually worried about, oh my God, do I have to out myself to this recruiter or this person that I'm talking about this role for? Or do I have to say, like, I'm a working parent, is that going to affect my job seeking? So that's the part that we just wanted to get rid of. And I still think that there's a great source and wealth of people, and we are just one space to be able to do that. There are so many different spaces, but it is engaging in those communities as well. And we have these conversations on a day-to-day basis with so many different employees, but so many different recruiters as well, to share best practice. So how can we support each other in, okay, you've got this amount of roles, we've got this amount of roles, can we collaborate together? Can we do some kind of like job fair to try and, everyone needs to work, everyone needs to earn, so can we try and do this together? Because it's not one size, like Sean says, one size fits all. It's about actually how do we embrace difference together and then try and support more people getting back into the workplace, especially at a time when businesses are still recruiting and there are still people that are seeking work, there are still people that have a wealth of transferable skills. So sometimes it's also about showing people, how do you take an accounting degree and then go and work in tech? How do you take a degree that is not necessarily for the role that you've applied for, but transfer your skills so that actually you are the perfect candidate to go for that role? And what can we do as recruiters and platforms and and communities to help support that work and that outreach?
Thanks for that, Chloe. That's really, really insightful. And I want to kind of take it back to your first point in talking about my GWork, because we'll go on to kind of creating and manifesting an inclusive culture and employer brand. And a question's actually just come in that I was keen to ask as well. So what do you look for in a business when you identify them as an inclusive brand that MyGWork wants to work with? Is there anything kind of specific you look for? Is there a common theme, or do you sense that do you see that there are common issues that brands will share?
So every single person that we work with, it starts with a conversation. It starts with what do you aim to have in a partnership with us? To get a feel and the rapport. And I always ask the question, you know, what networks do you have? You know, what's your percentage of LGBT people? Because if you're not correctly already representing the people within your business, and this can come for a number of reasons. It can come from you're at the very beginning of your journey and you don't know how. And so that's obviously our job to be able to support. It's being led by the network. I'm not going to lie, there are a lot of times that an LGBT network are like, oh my God, please, we need you to come and help support us as employees. And they've made the conversation. But I always have to feel like that I'm truly supporting the LGBT people in that business, whether I'm helping to help implement something or it's a place of dialogue and a conversation. There are times where we've said, actually, we don't think that you're right for the organization right now. We don't just work with anybody. It has to, I guess the ethics behind it have to be that you are representing. And as one of those people that has often ticked many boxes for someone as a candidate, I'm very good at actually having that conversation of saying, you know, I'm not just, whilst we are, you know, LGBT focused, we are never just one thing. Remember I said I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a parent, I'm a mental health survivor. So I'm going to be asking you, how inclusive as an organization are you in terms of well-being and support, and what are you doing, especially at this time, in terms of COVID and well-being, and what does that look like for your staff? What are you doing for your Black networks, because we are exhausted? What are you doing for LGBT? What's your progression for women? Because if you don't have a women's network, there's going to be a conversation. And I'm doing that across a broad number of identities and characteristics and points of difference, because that is truly how we create inclusive cultures. That's truly how we have really diverse workforces that embraces human beings and isn't just about, oh my gosh, look, we've done it, we've got LGBT people, oh my gosh, you know, we're more neurodiverse. Like, I want to see a breadth of people in roles. So I will always have that challenge and that pushback. And if it doesn't feel right, your money's great, but it's not going to be helping the people. So I will go back and say, these are my recommendations, or this is the work that we need to do, or I think you should really lend to the employee engagement, because there's a lot of training that you need to do in your business, and this is how we start putting it in place. But yeah, we don't just work with anyone, because I think that that's also irresponsible, and as a business that speaks on behalf of others but also invites people to a space of safety. I put my teeth back in. That's really irresponsible. So yeah, I couldn't do that.
I think for me that touches on a really important kind of perspective around diversity and inclusivity. So we've talked a little bit about the employee experience. So Kate, I think you mentioned about measuring at each stage. And Chloe, I think you beautifully articulated some of the things that do create a very inclusive culture. And I think some organisations can take a step and say, well, we want to get this particular diversity figure and that's it, don't care, just do it. And actually that isn't going to get the results that the organisation may want, because the chances are if you don't have those things that Chloe talked about, it feels okay. I can present my whole self and not feel worried or anxious about anything. And I feel that I can then contribute my best ability to work. If you don't have some of the things like the community, the support, the education, and the breadth of that, it's just not going to work. So I think it is really looking at the whole employee experience and challenging yourself. Are we being inclusive in our recruitment practices? How is our induction and onboarding? When do we do it? Are the times restrictive for people who have other commitments? So it really is taking a good and in-depth reflection on where you're at and an honest discussion. So it's really heartening, Chloe, that you say no to some people, because I think that that's a really reassuring thing. And I know that if I was in an organisation, you said no to me, I'd be like, right, well, okay, what do we need to do? So I think it's really positive.
And it always has to come from a place of learning. It's not, you know, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, but I just try and put myself in this position of, as someone more marginalized, I understand what it means to be different and to have those barriers to participate in roles just like everybody else. And so when I'm thinking about what is the experience going to be like as an employee, what's the experience going to be like as an employer, knowing those quotas and HR, and we've all got to work to certain things. What does it look like as a recruiter who on a much smaller scale is really trying to do the work, and so that and targets sometimes mean a lot. What does that also look like? And then kind of just what does that mean responsibly for us? And I think that when we're working in businesses where we're working with more marginalized groups of people and being aware of that, that's just something that we I would hope that people do, but at least I'm happy to say that we do.
Fantastic. I would just add one thing to it. We were very, very curious at Fair HQ, what does inclusion actually mean? And we've done a research about hundreds of studies and tried to understand what inclusion actually is and how it can be measured. And just actually this week has been so exciting. And we've put together a inclusion scale that was through 8 different steps of validation. Don't even ask me about that. It's our head of behavioral science that I told you we fantastically hired. And we are actually have now did a correlation study with how that correlates with other inclusion scales. And actually it's been done amazingly. And we've done for the first time actually validated it on different people from different backgrounds. So we have from different genders, so it measures the inclusion across every single one of those groups that we want to have as combine the diversity. It was quite interesting. And one thing that we find out is that you need to measure inclusion as well when it comes to your processes and policies. That is outside of the scale. So we added it up on the end of it is basically we're asking candidates from different demographics, candidates, actually employees, what are the experiences with different processes and policies in the organization. So to put it all together, and I can't wait to see all the data from those companies, but literally as exactly what Chloe and Jackie were talking about, it's very important to capture these things. And we were so curious to actually finally do that through the technology. And very soon, hopefully in a couple of months, I'll be able to share some interesting data as well.
And there's a question which is probably going to lead us on to our 4th pillar, that see the companies obviously striving for this. And the ones that are at the start of their journey, and I think Kate and Chloe, this is where your expertise and how you act as a business really affect businesses in a positive light, but addressing the initial imbalance, but to then have people who are more diverse and at leadership, how do companies then transition to give those people a seat at the table at kind of senior level and leadership level?
Time to get really uncomfortable. That's usually what I say. It's time to get really uncomfortable, because this is uncomfortable, and this is not the first time that we've done this. We are still trying to do this journey for women to get more women into senior leadership. We're still definitely trying to do this for people from more ethnic backgrounds, and we're trying to do it across identities. So that's usually what I say, is that this is a place of uncomfortability for all, because as a business where we're looking at your board, and your board is normally male and white, and there aren't a lot of women, and there's definitely a lot of ethnic background. What do you do in that place? Because that's uncomfortable. Imagine if you are that single candidate, or that might be viewed as the token, and the backlash that they get, they're doing it for the reason to kind of hold the door open for others. And so that's where I said it's about understanding people's difference, understanding people's experiences, share best practice. And the thing that I would say that I've been inspired by more than anything during the last 6 months is that businesses are actually finally speaking to each other in a way that businesses weren't speaking to each other before. It was, oh, well, that's the competition, we don't want to speak to them. Actually now it's, how do we all collaborate to survive? If you've got it right, what are you doing? And can we share best practice? Because I think I need some of that support, some of that help. So like I said, it normally starts, I'll not going to lie, with a network. If you've got the network within your business, then your policy has to have some form of succession planning internally. Even if you don't have that diverse talent yet, if you don't have the policy for it, then it doesn't matter what work you do, because if it doesn't exist in your business, then you can't hire the talent to then go into that place. So you have to start with your intent. that has to come from senior leadership, that they say, look, we recognize we don't have it here yet, but this is the system in place so that when it starts to funnel through, this is where it's going to go. You know, it's mentoring, reverse mentoring, it's collaborating together with businesses and saying, I'm a CEO for one business and I'm a white man. I'm a CEO from another business and I'm a black woman. And you know what? We are actually going to reverse mentor each other. That connects our businesses together. It makes people put a new viewpoint that if we're working together, actually, oh, I didn't know that that was a space that welcomed a black woman, a black woman's voice. Maybe I can work there. Oh, I didn't know that that business, you know, she's learned so much and she's fed back from this guy. So actually that's also, and then you start to build these bridges. So I think we need to learn to collaborate together much more as professionals. And that's where we're going to start to see the tides change, because we're all in this position. Every single business, even the ones that are getting it right, they then have to sustain the fact that they're getting it right. So yeah, I think that we just all need to continue to talk to each other and find ways to work together, and not do it because we've been forced to do it. It's just the right thing to do. We want to see our businesses thrive with difference. So do not think of it of like, oh my God, I've got no choice. But actually, with diversity of thought brings so much more productivity, it brings so much more creativity, and that is great for your bottom line. So I don't really know what the issue is if your business is going to make more money, because people are thinking outside the box in ways that, you know, if you have one entire workforce that are all the same, like, come on, we all want to earn more money and we all want to have more fun doing it. So why wouldn't you want to do that?
I think on that point as well, there's that clear pathway and that equal opportunities internally, isn't it? Because we focus so much on the recruitment side, and rightly so. We need to look at how we do market ourselves and how we do bring more diverse talent in. But that's not very good if once people come in, there's nowhere for them to go and grow, right? You want to ensure you're following that process right through. And I think a lot of the times we focus, well, from my perspective, you know, I've got my funnel, my little focus bit there, right? And I've got touch points over here and I've got my touch points to there. But you know, there's only so much you can influence. It's making sure you've got the people at the top and in those other positions to actually make sure you've got that flow all the way through. Otherwise, you know, it's kind of a fruitless effort. Or the other thing you're going to do is you're going to make some absolutely wonderful candidates for all your competitors to go to in those in those other roles if they're offering those opportunities, and you're going to miss out yourselves anyway after all that investment. So yeah, sorry, just to interject there, Jackie.
Please don't apologise, Sean.
I just want to say something. Oh, yeah, you're on.
I was going to say, Jackie, obviously this is something that you've done successfully over many years in advising leaders and boards, and we're talking about kind of the continuous processes and the fact that this is not a quick fix. So yeah. Is there things, what frameworks would you put in place? What processes have you traditionally put in place that have worked?
I think actually I'm gonna borrow something from Kate's website and also reinforce what Chloe's just said, is that this is uncomfortable. So you're going to go from comfort to growth, and in that space something's got to give. And so part of it is I think looking at the data and seeing where you're currently at, particularly in that internal pipeline. So we've done an amazing job of getting our diverse group in, they're in, but all of the candidates that we're selecting for our internal advancement, our internal promotions, are almost like the historical existence of what was there before we brought in, I'm not being very articulate, the new diverse people. So one of the things that is looking at the data, but then also challenging yourself and doing something differently. When I was responsible for leadership development in a large organisation, we were looking at who leaders were nominating, and year on year, despite us getting almost 40 to 50% gender balance of all hires coming in, it was stuck around 30% of women being nominated for these global leadership development programs. So what did we do? Is we paused everything, took a third of our budget and said, we're going to create a women-only program. So one of the outcomes of that, and again, it takes time, it takes investment, it takes education, because within that, even in the most progressive, diverse, inclusive organizations, you're going to get challenges to say, well, why? why are you doing this? And I think part of that is because here's our vision. Here's the benefit of having a truly diverse and inclusive workforce, and that's why we're doing it. Another tactic which was very helpful in education is similar to what Chloe's mentioning about mentoring, was actually we put leadership pairs into roles. So that when we couldn't find one individual that had all of the skills, we would pair them. We did paired women, we did men and women, we did paired men. But that was just about broadening that depth and experience in the individual, but also then enabling them to progress. And the net result of all of those investments over a number of years was you look around the senior leader table and you've got 60% women. So it takes time, it takes investment, it takes discomfort. I think the other thing as well is I can't stress enough this education, this unconscious bias education. So whilst you're attracting and bringing in new diverse talent, some people are at different stages of their education on their journey around diversity and inclusivity and why it's important. So to support the whole organisation and create a very inclusive culture, I think that education cannot be sort of skipped over. And it is both, from a leader's point of view, it's both your own education, but also then supporting other people on their journey, wherever they're at, around why inclusivity is so important.
I think it's, sorry to just add, but I think it's also about language. And I know that Kate, you went on this journey about the different ways in which you advertise roles and the language that you use. I think that also, I saw a question and I'm jumping in, but you know, in the language of when people are applying for roles, that actually as businesses, you've made your job specs as inclusive as possible, and you've taken out those barriers that stop a diverse person from actually applying in the first place. So, you know, I want to see that you're talking about paternity leave, because it's not only inclusive of mothers and fathers, but people who adopt, people who are grandparents. So there are so many different ways in which you can be a parent, and that's a major characteristic. So being bold in your actual job specs of trying to remove as many different barriers as you can that stop more diverse people from wanting to apply for your roles is a great starting place, and also a place that a lot of people forget. They forget that sometimes the language that they use in the application stage will stop at least 50% of a more diverse background from wanting to take part in your business. But also another quick tip, be very bold about who your business is. People these days will do MI5 research about your organization. So if your website does not have your D&I strategy, does not have a fair reflection of your business, or at least the intent of how you're trying to be more diverse, then a more diverse employee or candidate is going to look at your website and go, doesn't look very diverse, or they haven't been open about where they're not. So I don't think that I'm going to go in and maybe be the token or be, you know, that 1 in 100. So be bold about what you are trying to do, where you are at, and that will also help drive a more diverse talent force.
I think building on that as well, Chloe, and tying back to what we were talking about are procedures and policies. You know, sometimes they can get forgotten, but actually everybody is going to be reading the employee handbook at one point or another. So is it really reflective of your style of organisation, of the inclusivity? And just that example that you used around the policy is so important, to embrace different definitions of what being a parent is, if that's a particular policy you're looking at.
And we talk about there being kind of uncomfortable, you know, it's an uncomfortable topic certainly at the leadership side. And I'm sure this kind of forms as part of your roles when you're advising companies, but what's kind of the first bit of advice that you give to leaders who want to make change, who are uncomfortable and scared of saying the wrong thing?
That's okay, and it starts with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's okay to be vulnerable. And actually, I think that that's, for me, one of the interesting things around today's world and today's market around leadership. We have very many diverse models of leadership. And so that vulnerability, that sort of being able to express, I don't know all the answers to this, but I want us to work together, is a very different style and a very inclusive style that I think everybody can have access to. So yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry, Chloe.
Go, Kate, go ahead.
One thing that was really interesting, especially when Black Lives Matters was very, bursting in a couple of months ago. I got so many calls from people that were white guy CEOs of SMEs and startups, and they were like, what am I supposed to say? Am I supposed to say something? Am I first of all don't talk to me, you need to talk to people that are actually represented and they might have experience that they might share with you. But the second thing was I was like, look at yourself as a parent. What do you do? People will try to repeat. And parents, if they're vulnerable and actually include the children in the learning, and they say sometimes, I really don't know how things are, but I'm here to learn, and I'm here to learn with you. That's something that creates a connection that will be much more authentic and that will actually last, rather than trying to say the right thing, which might be sometimes, there are lots of people that got backlash from trying to say something right, but they didn't. And that's why people felt really uncomfortable about it. And that's why they started reaching out to people, I guess, to all of you. I assume you probably had conversations like that. So it's about the place of being authentic about, I really don't know how to start this, but I really care about starting that right. And I need your help. And you're here on this journey with me. Please help me to get it right. And continuously, don't do it once, but continuously do that. That's the same. Consistency is a parenting thing, is the same thing. As a leader, you're responsible for the consistency and you need to be part of it. So that's one thing that have been very helpful actually for us when we had those conversations.
It's like I said, it's being mindful about difference. I'm Black, so you're watching my life being played out on a global stage, and also I'm in this position where I have to offer a lot of support to a lot of different businesses in my role. But it was me being very clear in this role that actually, when you're asking more marginalized people, it's not just Black people, it's Black LGBTQ people in particular, it's Black trans people. When we look at the violence to the trans community right now, be mindful when you engage with those communities that actually, in being able to support, it's also traumatic. And so if you don't get the response that you were hoping for, be consistent. Like Kate said, still keep continuing to do the work, but understand when you're speaking to different marginalized groups that you might have to do a little bit more research and a little bit more understanding in the different groups that you're speaking to, but to obviously just keep pushing and just make sure that that is reflective in the work that you do. But if you don't go and seek counsel from more marginalized groups and ask their opinions themselves, and for them to consult instead of speaking on their behalf, then that's where it goes wrong. Because if you ask any of the three women, if you speak on behalf of women, if you're a women's network and you don't engage a woman in your group, it's going to go very, very wrong. If you don't speak to a parent about, the parental policies, flexible working, because a lot of parents right now, we're all laughing going, we've actually lost roles and we've lost work, and now the entire world is on a flexible working contract, and we could have told you how this works. So you have to have, this report can be beneficial. There are so many different examples of how we can do this. It isn't just on, oh my God, it's the marginalized Olympics. Actually, there are so many different examples of where just having conversation and celebrating difference can actually make our workforces much better. But you have to go and speak to those people, and they might not necessarily come to you. And like Kate has done, she's gone and actually found the candidates. You sometimes have to go and find those people yourselves, because they're afraid to engage. In the same way people are afraid to ask for help or they don't know where to start, we would always say, do you know what, the fact that you're here and you're doing this now, that's the starting place, and we build on the journey from here.
Your initial point, Chloe, it really leads on quite well to a question that's come in, because someone's asked about those who are affected by discrimination, who are more involved and engaged in organisations, in initiatives and activities. There's a movement towards allies, which is helping more people to get involved. But how do we get people involved who aren't naturally affected by it?
I have an issue. Yeah, I have a personal issue with the term ally, just because what does an ally do? And I think the term has been co-opted. I prefer co-disruptor, because there is action in disruption. It doesn't mean that you're actively physically doing something, but you're taking my identity with you. But we should all be co-disruptors for each other. It's not like I said, it's not the marginalised Olympics. I would hope Jackie, Kate, Oliver, Sean, you would be allies to me as I would be allies to you, and sharing each other's journeys and the work that we're doing. So it's about recognising each other's differences, and that the 40 odd people that are on this call, that you are now taking this last hour back to your businesses, back to other people. And that's allyship, by continuing to tell each other's stories, each other's journeys. By creating a space where we can have these uncomfortable conversations, and that people are allowed to actually say, I actually don't know what to do. I want to help, but I'm not sure. Because there are those of us that will say, okay, do you know what? I really appreciate that you listened and that you heard what I was saying, that I was believed. And now how can we go and do this work together? That there are people that have gone and said, we have no ethnicity policy here whatsoever. We need an expert. And they've gone and they've used their budget to pay for an expert, and they haven't said, can you just share best practice with me, because we're respectful that more marginalized people, they're sharing trauma, so we have to pay the time for that. So I just think it's intent, but I think it's creating space. And most people will be absolutely genuine in that engagement if they know that it's coming from a good place. If we know that you're trying to do something because it's a quota and you've been forced to, you're going to get pushback, but just be prepared to get that pushback. So yeah, it's not the responsibility of more marginalized people to do the work. I need you to go and do a bit of your homework first, but know that if you come and your intentions are good in the interaction, I will give you the wealth of my resource and knowledge to be able to support you, because I know that you are then going to go on and do that for all the other people that you're connected to hereafter.
I think on that, there's, you know, when you talked earlier, Chloe, about that being uncomfortable, you know, it is very uncomfortable. And when I've spoken to people and you understand the journey they've gone on, and you, it's not that you choose to, as a person, shut that out, but if you've not had to experience that, you can't relate to it. But as soon as you start hearing people's personal stories of their journey in life, and actually, you know, I'll speak to people from different backgrounds at work, and I wouldn't even think of what they've had to go through, because you just get on and have a lovely conversation, and you go for a tea or a coffee, and it's all great. But you hear how they've actually sometimes changed who they are in places of work. It's really sad, and it does make you very uncomfortable. But if that doesn't inspire you to try and help everybody be who they are in the workplace, then you're probably in the wrong line of work, because it'll make you change the way you look at everything, and just even the smallest thing you can do to help, you will make that action.
At some point, the majority of us have all had to do it in business or in work. It's not very nice, but it's about just other people recognizing the other side. You know, I can guarantee on almost every panel that I've ever spoke on, someone will say to me afterwards, oh my God, Chloe, you spoke so well. But in comparison to maybe my white panelists, they'll go, oh my God, you're amazing. Now, why is it that that person was amazing and that I spoke so well? Because unfortunately, it's the unconscious bias that someone who looks like me isn't articulate, whereas I love words and I love language. So actually, it's my superpower. And it's breaking down those barriers, because also to that other person, they may not have seen a lot of Black women in senior management or a lot of Black women in higher up positions. So the only examples that they can take from are the stereotypes. Hence why we have to create more diverse backgrounds that do celebrate difference, that aren't just reflections of me. It's other parents, it's other Black and brown people, it's other people with all many different identities, and that's the workforce, and that's the mainstream. But it's also you being able to call it out. You know, it's you being able to say, Sean, I spoke to this candidate, and actually your process it was really uncomfortable. This is my feedback, and not just ignoring those uncomfortable moments. Because if someone trusted you enough to share that with you in the first place, they know that you're someone who can actually potentially do something about it. So it's also then not being uncomfortable with that knowledge and actively trying to make that change in the processes that you have. But I can see Oliver, because it's like it's 1:30.
We could keep talking for hours. I'm conscious that there's been a few questions that have come in that we haven't quite yet had the chance to answer, and I don't know what what everyone's afternoon is looking like. But there is a question that's come up a couple of times, and it's about anonymizing profiles, and it very much touches on what you were saying, Chloe. And is this something that's effective, anonymising profiles in the hiring process to combat initial selection bias? Is it something that's been effective? Is it something
I would say yes. I actually have an English name and I have an African name. I don't use my African name because I know if I use my African name, I'm not gonna get somewhere. The amount of times I've turned up somewhere and someone's gone, "Oh, hi," because what I look like and what I sound like are two very different things, and you don't necessarily assimilate Chloe with a black face. So I'm always pushing for just being very open in the recruitment phase of, CVs, taking off the name and actually looking at the skill set, because there's the biases and unconscious biases that we have around name and names with a cultural background. That is the first step to not really getting a diverse candidate. And that happens in so many different ways, from people's surname to the characteristics that they put. So I just names off, background, or do that right at the very, very end. So I know that there are some businesses that actually all of those characteristics where you can identify a person is the last page of the application, so that you've read through the entire application, you've already made a decision, and then that last part you only get to see if that's the candidate that you want to go ahead with. Processes like that I think are really inclusive, because unfortunately the stereotypes that we have in our systems mean that we make these preconceived biases against people, and then we're just denying the things that we said we wanted in the first place. But Kate.
Yeah, totally. Chloe, I'm just gonna add on what you were saying. Add a bit more numbers to build the case. So we know, for example, that it really works if we remove the names for women in STEM specifically. So if you completely blind CVs from the name, also university, etc., etc., there was an increase in acceptance of women's CVs by 40%. Which is an enormous amount of number, and it's the same for people of color. So there was a lot of studies at Oxford University, as for example, done, and once you've removed anything that was suggested that the person is not white, which was usually the name, potentially the location where they were from, etc., they were able to increase the likelihood of those people from any backgrounds to be, especially ethnic backgrounds, especially Black people, by 50%. So it's just the little things, and it's enormous amount of difference. And I would always recommend to use tools, or have one person in your team, if you're very small, to just blind the CVs for you before you send it to the people that are actually making the decisions. Because keep in mind that we're making our decisions split seconds, so it's 5 to 10 seconds we're making an opinion about that person, and the first thing we tend to see is the name, and then we see the university, and we connect with the people like that. So definitely for blind CVs, 100%.
I think like you say, it's a lot more information, isn't there, to take out. You strip to truly do it properly. In my opinion, you need to strip so much from there, because you can take a name off, but like I say, I have the location on. How many times have we spoken to hiring managers who go, "Oh, we're in Leeds and they live in Manchester. I don't know about them and that commute." And it's well, that's their choice, right? I've made that choice before. It's up to an individual, and I think people can put so many of their own little factors that they think they're looking for, and actually let's just speak to this person, let's understand more about them, what they want. I think that's one key thing I try to get when I speak to candidates, is what they actually want out of a role in a company. I can tell them where we are at any point of our journey, what we do, what progression looks like, what the roles look like, and if we're not right, it's an opportunity for that person to self-select out if we're not the right place for them as well. And again, you can cover off some of those things in that call. If you do have hiring managers who may use the little things like location as something they wouldn't select on, actually go, well, I've had a conversation with the person, I've explained how things operate here, what our hours look like, what flexibility looks like, where we're based, can you park, where's the train station, that's all boxed off, they're comfortable, right? So I think we've got to remember that candidates do a lot of, like Chloe mentioned, a lot of research into us as organisations. So we should never assume these little things, because I'd say 99% of the time, that person's already kind of covered all of that stuff before wasting any time and usually going through a very long-winded application process to get in front of you.
The last, when you asked before about how we choose to work with people, that I always have that conversation, have your hiring managers gone on inclusion training? Because it's also, there's no point doing all of this work for blind CVs, and actually your hiring managers are the problem, because they're actually discriminating against people in the process about those things. So if your hiring managers have not all gone on inclusion training and actually comfortable and confident that they are inclusive people that are bringing people into the business, then that also has to be a stop-start. So that's also a challenge for businesses, is make sure that that group of people, because they're the ones that are also deciding who gets to see the CVs in the first place, that first shortlisting. So if they're not inclusive, it's not going to work either.
Yeah, and I think we talk about the unconscious bias. We could be the problem at recruitment from facing it, right? So, we need to question ourselves. So there's the inclusion training we've made mandatory. So we used to send it before we'd let anyone in near the process. And then we can also pull reports on people's pass-through rates and start to break down stuff like that. So you can start to then look for trends. So I could go, actually, Chloe's really brutal with people. She only lets 10% through. Let's look at that 10%. That 10% mirror exactly Chloe herself, right? So you can start to try to break down things like that if you really want to get into it. And again, none of us are perfect, so let's just keep challenging what we're doing and look to iterate and improve upon it, right?
Sometimes accountability really does work. That's now, like in times of now, when you were saying, people are getting it wrong for Black Lives Matter, but that's because the accountability has come from sometimes their own employees that went, hold on a second, as an employee, I'm actually prepared to lose my job to tell the truth. And this is what it's really like here. So, in business, outside of business, a lot more people are saying we want to work for places where we truly feel like we belong and we're seen. And if you're not going to do that right, actually, we're going to challenge you. So now is the time. Please make sure that you get it right. And there's enough resource, enough people that are willing and prepared to help you. So just listen and then take the action from there. Because if not, it's going to be very expensive. Best example I give you is Starbucks.
I think these final points is a real great way to wrap up. The accountability, to work together with one another, to really listen to each other, and take responsibility for it. We have gone 7 minutes over, which I'm not surprised about, because we could talk for hours on this. But Chloe, Jackie, Kate, Sean, thank you ever so much. For me personally, and I'm sure for everybody else in the audience, this has been such an education. It's been incredibly insightful, and the advice and the experience that you've given and you've shared, it really is invaluable. And I'm sure, like myself, many others who here will take that away, and hopefully we will all work together to put these things into practice. So to the audience, thank you ever so much for joining. Really do appreciate the time, the hour and 10 minutes that you've come on with us. To the questions that we couldn't answer, we will perhaps put that to the panelists after, if you don't mind, just that last bit of work.
And thank you, Oliver. Thank you. This has been a really great panel, so thank you, and Bernshi and team. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining.
Great. Have a nice weekend, everyone.